In 1534, Jacques Cartier sailed into Canada with his beautiful beard. He traveled along the west coast of Newfoundland, discovered Prince Edward's Island, and explored the Gulf of St. Lawrence. He abducted two indigenous people, created a base for fishing, and was the first Frenchman to reach Canada. He was eventually forced to return due to the harsh winters. 7 years later, Jacques Cartier came back to Canada with the hope to expand the Baguette Empire, making an alliance with the First Nations people and creating a fortress which would become Quebec City. The fortress had a 4-meter deep moat, a wall of cannons, and a fence of 5-meter tall logs surrounding the perimeter. And it also inhabited a casual 50 men. That number would eventually drop into single digits because Canadian winters are no joke in it. After the weather became more survivable, also known as the freezing into a brick after stepping 1 foot outside, France began pumping in as many people as they could into the city we talked about before, Quebec City. This city had around 70,000 men, women, and children, and it was the capital of trade in modern-day Quebec and Ontario. Ontario? The French had around 18,000 men ready to defend the city, with most of them being untrained and not ready for battle. The British had around 11,000 combat-trained men, with most of their energy coming from drinking 20 cups of tea per day. The reason the British wanted to attack France was because they were both out to dominate the European fur trade. This attack would be a problem for France because although they had more men than the British, their men weren't fully trained and could not easily defend against the British army, and that could mean that the city would fall and they had to surrender. This battle would determine if Canadians would drink tea or eat croissants all day. At 13th of September 1759, the British forces managed to climb a cliff face at 4 a.m. and caught the French forces a bit off guard. However, Jacques de Montcalm, the general who was tasked with defending New France, was prepared for this move and was ready to send thousands of men towards the British forces. As the battle begun, the French were too busy eating snails, and so they forgot to aim at the British.
He's dead! After the battle, France lost all claims and gave Louisiana to Spain. Meanwhile, Britain was given Florida by the Spanish. Many soldiers would be executed using poison. Most of the British army would also leave. And they... The whole battle will take a total of 30 minutes, which is a short time that would determine the future of Canada. The leader of the British Army, James Wolfe, would die during the battle, and the leader of the French, Marquis de Montcalm, would die in the next few days. The French would surrender a few days after the battle, and Canada would firmly be in the control of the British. After the battle, France lost all claims and gave Louisiana to Spain. Meanwhile, Britain was given Florida by the Spanish. Many soldiers would be executed using poison. Most of the British army would also leave. And those who were left mostly suffered from scurvy. They had to live another tough winter. The indigenous would also suffer from the defeat as they lost one of their biggest trade partners. The French were also affected as well, as their main source of income, which has been trading dead beavers, was no longer possible. This is a beaver, and this is British. So these are French. This is a beaver. The indigenous would get the beaver, give it to the French, and French would give what was called Canada would become a small province in the North American empire the British had made. But the French culture wouldn't be lost, as various leaders would make deals with the British to make sure that their language and most of the culture would stay the same. Although the language that has been used in the government would be English, the government would be a civil government and a military regime. which was leaning toward looking like a French government rather than a British government. This would start many conflicts between British merchant and colonial administrators. It wasn't only the British having conflicts, the French would also write often, which led to the British government in New France to adapt and change in many ways. The religion of the French would also have been affected. Act of supremacy, which would stop Catholics to have a government position. And since French people were Catholic, mostly their lives were affected. The British economy would also be ruined because the amount of money they spent on war, while the war annual spending was around £21 million, which led to the British taxing all their colonies in North America. Which affected the lives of many citizens who weren't healthy. The British couldn't trade with the indigenous because of many conflicts, which included the Pontiac's War, which was one of the main conflicts between the two groups. This would have the worst impact to the economy of the British because the only reasons they ever stayed there in North America was because of the beaver fur trade, which made them a lot of money and paid for the 7 Years' War in many ways. However, the British economy wasn't fully ruined, as they now had access to a lot of good lumber, which they could make a lot of money.
A lot of times I decided to call you and know you. How's the project going? No?
I thought you were dead.
He's dead!